Welcome, I'm your host, Malcolm Gallagher. From our BizVision studios in the UK, you're watching the BVTV network. Now, the advantage of being a business coach like myself is that you're able to see companies through various lenses. I like to feel that I'm reasonably adept at fairly quickly guesstimating, if that's the word, guesstimating the culture of a business. I don't take it from the top, but from as low down the ladder as I can connect with. You see, to me, a true corporate culture is not just something sent down from the top like tablets of stone, but it's embedded throughout the business from the rawest recruit to the very top. So what is a good corporate culture and how should it be created and then lived? Well, my guest today is an expert on culture and has written the book, Disrupting Corporate Culture. Welcome, David. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Malcolm. Good to see you.
Yeah,
thanks for having me on your show.
I haven't woken you up, because I know you're in San Francisco and we've got all these time differences. It's very confusing at the moment, isn't it?
Well, I've had my first little cup of espresso, and it's 7 a.m. over here. So yes, we're good to go.
Yeah, normally, and just before you start bragging about the California weather, I have to tell you that here in the UK, as we're recording this, the sun is shining. On the last day of March.
Yes.
On the last day of March. Yeah,
it's fair. It's dark here, so yes, I'm envious.
Yeah, so. But most importantly, the sun is not just shining, but we're seeing a way forward after this awful pandemic year. Are you finding that?
Yes, as well. California is doing fairly well on the vaccination front. So, although it could be better, but we're on the way.
Well, that's the way the UK is leading. David, I'm delighted you've kindly agreed to guest on the BVTV network on our Today's Leaders channel, our flagship channel. In this BVTV show, viewers and listeners, I'll be talking to David in my usual 3 parts. Now, first, I'll ask him what makes for an effective corporate culture and what is a corporate culture and why a business needs one. In part 2, we move to talking about the fact that culture involves change, and that can be complex to achieve. In part 3, I'm asking him if he thinks culture needs to evolve now to match what we could call the altered business world that we're now facing. Before we start, David, can you please give us a brief overview of who you are and what your book's about?
Sure. Well, thank you again for having me. The book is, as the title implies, Disrupting Corporate Culture, is about challenging the prevailing urban legends and mythology that exists about corporate culture, and bringing essentially some of the really interesting science that has been emerging out of fields like neuroscience, cognitive anthropology, cognitive linguistics, fields that are pretty far removed from business and the business world. But really interesting findings and work that's been done over the last 30 years, trying to bring that work to the business audience and the business world to really upend and debunk some of the prevailing quote unquote wisdoms about culture. Turns out that most managed culture shaping endeavors, as you know, I'm sure, don't work. Yeah. And yet companies spend literally billions of dollars on culture shaping, culture change, culture management programs and initiatives every day, every year, with little impact. And I myself have been a part of those initiatives. I've been on probably 4 or 5 over my 30-year career in business, culture change initiatives in big companies like Microsoft and others, and none of them have ever worked. And that led me back to graduate school at the tender age of 48 to try to figure out why despite great visions and great colleagues, super smart people, burning platforms, why do so few culture shaping endeavors work? Why is the field littered with a lot of punditry? A lot of books, a lot of people who proclaim themselves to be culture experts. The big consulting firms, charge millions of dollars in fees every day for culture projects, but very few actually have any impact on the business. And so why is that? And then I learned fairly quickly that, what's happening is that the world of business is and the business schools actually are partly to blame here, are sort of trafficking in ideas and concepts and technologies that are either naive or outdated, or simply not trafficking in any science at all, just sort of making stuff up. Anyway, that's a little bit about me. My background prior to all of this, I've been in the corporate world for about 30 years doing organizational development and change work with companies like Microsoft and IBM and William Mercer, which is a large consultancy. And before that, I was a pilot, a flight instructor, and charter pilot. I'm also a jazz musician, a professional musician, which I've been doing for well over 30 years.
And go and brag about you. You've got 7 CDs out, haven't you?
No one's ever heard them, but yes, they're out there somewhere.
And before we move on, though, you have to tell us what type of jazz, because is it that sort of really loud jazz that we enjoy maybe down at New Orleans, or is it that soft jazz that my wife plays on a Sunday morning as she's given me the list of jobs to do for the week? What is it?
It's not the kind, hopefully, that you hear in the supermarket. It's modern jazz, mostly original music that I write based on the bebop and modern jazz tradition, not the commercial, really the music of the 1950s and 60s now brought forward.
Can I just squeeze another little question in there then?
Please.
Do you find doing that is a great form of relaxation? Because this is something we're all challenged with at the moment, mindfulness, well-being, isn't it?
It's funny you asked that question, because, originally for the first 20 years of my career, my form of relaxation was work. And my music career was my primary focus. I actually was a musician first and a organizational development HR person, on the side as a way to support my vocation or avocation. Over time, that has, of course, has shifted. Yes, in many respects, the lessons of jazz and improvisation, such as being present, awareness, breathing, are all translatable to change work. And so it's taken me many years to really understand really what that means. It's easy to say, hard to do, right? So,
I quite agree. I've met so many people on the 500 plus interviews I've done since last March there who play the guitar or some form of music like that, read poetry as their turn off from the corporate world. But anyways, let's start part 1. I want to talk about corporate culture. What makes for an effective corporate culture? Actually, what is corporate culture, and why does a business need one in the first place? What are some of the common mistakes and misunderstandings that occur that may hinder the effectiveness of corporate culture? I know it's a fairly wide-ranging question, so fairly wide-ranging answer, Dave.
Well, I think in your question, and you said it in your opening, right? The culture is not passed down like tablets of stone from on high. I think in that statement that you made at the opening, that kind of says it all. One of the major prevailing myths is that there are such things as good cultures and bad cultures. One of the things that the science, the neuroscience, and the cognitive anthropology shows very clearly is that cultures exist whether you like it or not. When humans form into societies and into groups, cultures form. Cultures happen with or without leaders. Cultures happen whether you like it or not. Cultures happen. Culture just is. The metaphor I often use is it's really more the lens or the window through which you look rather than what you see outside. Culture comes from the brain. It's actually the prevailing, one of the prevailing anthropological views is that, and sounds a little academic, but I'll just say it anyway. It's an evolutionary adaptive response to the demands of one's environment. So, for example, humans evolve culture in order to survive.
So is it a Darwin-based theory, and you're thinking?
Well, it's not Darwin, but it follows closely along with Darwinism in that human societies, first off, cultures have existed for millennia, right? It wasn't invented by consultants and CEOs. Right. It's existed for millennia, and cultures happen when humans form into societies. because culture is knowledge. The prevailing wisdom or the prevailing view, again, outside of the business realm, is that culture is knowledge. What kind of knowledge? Well, it's tacit knowledge. It's background knowledge. It's stuff that you know that you don't know you know.
Yeah.
And that knowledge is incredibly important because that knowledge actually allows survival, allows groups to cooperate, allows groups to interact effectively, allows cross-group interactions. That knowledge allows, primitive, so-called primitive, I don't like to use that word, but, so-called societies that exist, on island nations, for example, in the South Pacific to rebuild after typhoons without any outside help. How do they know how to reconstruct their homes and help their crops come back after devastation of a typhoon, for example? That's cultural knowledge. The example I use all the time is when you walk into an elevator, how do you know not to look people in the eye? How do you know that? Where does that come from? Somebody ever teach you that? No, that is culture. And there's millions of examples that we employ every day. Culture in organizations is no different. It's the background knowledge that we use to make sense of our worlds. And it's shared knowledge. The culture, you and I have millions of bits of knowledge about how to operate in the world, but the items, the bits that we share in our organization, if you and I were in the same business, would be part of our corporate culture or cultures, because mostly businesses have many corporate cultures.
So are you saying then it's fairly easy to have a good culture and a bad culture? I mean, for example, my wife, Kim, who will contact a new client or a new guest, will make the first call to a business, and she can tell almost simply from the first call with the receptionist or the first person she talks to whether we're going to have an enjoyable relationship or not.
It's interesting. I like to say that there's no such thing as a good or bad culture. Let me try to elaborate on that question. First off, I should caveat by saying cultures are incredibly complex things, right? If you can begin just from a little bit that I've said, the culture is knowledge, and it's this background knowledge and stuff we know that we don't know we know, but we use every day anyway. Then you begin to appreciate a little bit of the complexity of what I'm talking about. Cultures exist with or without, leaders. And where culture comes from, and I'll get to your question by answering it this way, where cultures come from, what we call the task environment. As we like to say, culture follows task. The prevailing wisdom in businesses is the other way around, task follows culture. But it's really that culture comes from what you do all day long. Yeah. Because what you do with literally like the means of production of your business, what you do with your hands, what you do with your mind, what you do in groups shapes how you think. This is well established in neuroscience and cognitive anthropology. So therefore, companies that make pumps versus companies that make that sell data services, companies that make search engines, companies that make airplanes are all going to have different cultures based a lot on the means of production and the sort of core task that they're involved in and how successful they are at it. Because generally cultures form out of habits and routines and practices that have made you successful. Why? Because what makes you successful as a business, especially if you've survived a rather difficult existential moment, or you've solved a really hard problem, technical problem or market problem, you've become successful. Usually a fairly durable culture will form around that experience, that collective experience, that then becomes part of the knowledge, or what we call the reference system in your business. Right. So cultures form out of what people do all day long. Sometimes also cultures are closely related to the professionalization, the dominant occupational group, software engineers, doctors and HMOs, actuaries and insurance, investment traders on investment banking floors, right? These occupational groups will also bring values and mindsets and belief systems to bear. Cultures form out of a dominant occupational group's presence in a company. So it's either the task environment or the professional group. But the point is that forms the basis of this sort of reference system. What we see as culture in organizations often is a reaction to or compensation for that. So your example about you can tell quickly whether company has a good culture or a bad culture, what you might be picking up on in that moment is a reaction to or compensation for something deeper in the system. So, for example, we have we have a client here in the San Francisco Bay Area, a data technology company in the real estate space that highly values teamwork. Mm-hmm. It's all about, as many companies do, teamwork it's all about teamwork. Well, in our research there, we have found that actually teamwork is an espoused or articulated value that actually doesn't really exist in the business that much, because what really exists in the business from a deeper cultural perspective in terms of their knowledge, their reference system, is this concept of craft. Now, craft means in this business, it means being really good at what you do.
Right.
You know your stuff.
Craftsmanship.
So,
yes. Yeah.
Craftsmanship. Exactly. And so this idea, and people use that word craft, right? He's crafty, or, he's got great craft, or she's got great craft. I will work with you in that business if I believe you know your stuff. Yeah. But I'm not going to really collaborate you or be very much an effective team partner with you if I don't respect your craft. Mm-hmm. So this value of teamwork, and you might say, well, this company is very collaborative. Maybe, but this value of teamwork is a compensation for this deeper cultural phenomena of craft, which really gets closer to that lived culture that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's totally fascinating, David, and opened my eyes. I'm busy working my way through your book, whilst balancing all the other things we've got to do at the moment in time. So it's your fault if I don't get to sleep at night, by the way.
Okay, then you'll send me an email, I'm sure.
Yeah, David, before we move to part 2, I'd just like to remind viewers and listeners of your URL, which is all the W's. Viewers, obviously, you can see it on the screen behind me, but I'll spell it out for listeners. ONTOS, ontosglobal.com, ontosglobal.com, www.ontosglobal.com. Okay, you got that down, listeners and viewers? You should have written that down. And you can see the title of David's book there. Just read out the full title, David, please.
You know what? I don't even know what the full title, but it really has to do with how cognitive science disrupts accepted beliefs about corporate culture.
I know. I just did that because I needed to explain it. But anyways, it's great. It is so interesting. I've got to say to you, people, get yourself into starting to understand, because corporate culture, conscious agenda, whatever you want to start to put things into, we're going to be into an altered world. Now, David, time for part 2. Let's move to talking about the fact that culture involves change. And you're an expert at transformation, as your team are. And change can be complex to achieve, though, can't it? How do you suggest a business goes about creating and embedding the right corporate culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the first thing I would say is that your culture or cultures, again, I'm going to use this word reference system, which is really the knowledge, not to refer to the London taxis, but the knowledge that you have or share in your organization that is tacit, that is known but unknown, right? That helps you navigate and operate and make sense of the world. We might think of these as assumptions or belief systems, rules, rules of thumb, sort of tribal knowledge, right? That's culture. You become aware of this typically when you actually try to change something. Most of the time, you remain unaware of your culture. And the analogy that I like to use is, imagine landing after a 16-hour flight from the west coast of the United States in the middle of Africa. And in the middle of the night and it's 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and you're coming out of the airport and you're looking for a taxi. Mm-hmm. And there's no signage in English, or if that's your language. There's absolute utter chaos. You can't even see a taxi, but you see a lot of people trying to get your attention, grab your bag, take your luggage, offer you rides, right? It's utter chaos, right? Suddenly, everything that you knew about what it means to exit an airport and grab and get a taxi to go to your hotel or do whatever you're going to do is out the window. Everything that you knew no longer applies.
Yeah.
That is the clash of cultures. And you become aware of your culture or your reference system when you actually are confronted with a starkly different kind of reality, or you're actually trying to change something. And that's how you suddenly become aware that everything that you thought you knew about how things should go or how things work no longer applies. The classic business example that we're seeing daily is the plight of industrial companies who are trying to become digital, the sort of so-called digital transformation of the industrial world through Internet of Things and sensors on everything and AI and machine learning, et cetera. A 150-year-old industrial company that makes pumps is going to have a very, very difficult time becoming a digital platform, much more so than most of its leaders would care to admit, or most of the consulting firms would care to offer. Culturally speaking, it's almost impossible, because if culture follows task, if culture comes from what you do all day long, you then need to change your habits, your routines, your practices, your processes. You need to change the very way in which you run your business and do your business to actually change and impact the culture. And this is the attribution error that companies also get into. They think they need to change the culture to become a different kind of company, whereas in fact it's the other way around. They need to actually change what they do all day long. And when I say what they do, how they plan, how they budget, how they allocate resources, how they think about the customer, how they think about product, all of the processes and practices that go into running your business on a day-to-day business. Those are the targets of intervention. Those are the places where you need to look to change culture. It's not about changing what the leaders say or changing behavior. If we all start to operate more collaboratively, for example, it's really about doing things fundamentally differently at the business practice level.
Wow,
and that's the fundamental to change. And why? Well, again, I take it back to culture's in the brain. Culture's a neurochemical process in the brain. If you want to lose 20 pounds or quit smoking or, stop eating red meat because you have a heart condition, and the doctor says that you're going to die if your cholesterol level doesn't come down. How do you change that? Well, you're not going to change that through willpower alone. Most of the science will confirm that. You're not going to change that through pronouncements. You're going to have to change it through daily adjustments and fairly daily radical changes to your routines.
Very good.
The same is true for culture, right? It's a chemical process in the brain that can only be impacted. So with the message for CEOs, of course, is leadership. Leaders do have something to do with culture, absolutely. But it doesn't come from what they say or, the tablets of stone, as you say, passed on down or the pronouncements that they make or the town hall speeches that they give. It's leaders control resources. Leaders set agendas. Leaders determine what we're going to do or not do. They set the vision. And it's those kinds of activities that then instill or enact or help change practices in the organization that then starts to change the culture. And you can begin to see that it's not a linear progression, but it's a complex chain of events that leaders have a lot to do with, of course.
Yeah, David, that was really refreshing thinking. Now for part 3. The world has changed dramatically in this last year. I think McKinsey was saying we've moved forward 10 years in 10 months or something around about there, but especially in areas such as you were just discussing before, digital transformation, working from home, remote leadership, the whole conscious agenda. Do you think businesses need to be reviewing their culture to see if it needs to evolve now to match the altered business world we're in?
Well, again, I would say, good luck with that, because if you're a company that makes, refrigerators or, plastic sheeting for airline seats, whatever, until your business fundamentally changes, that culture is not going to really change. The stuff that we're talking about, working from home and all this stuff is fairly peripheral. If you think of it as an iceberg, it's still the stuff at the top of the iceberg. The stuff that I'm interested in and the stuff that really comprises culture is the stuff well below the waterline.
Yeah, the danger bit. And that's the stuff that keeps you mired in the present. It keeps you
As I say in the book, cultures are perfect until they're not, and they're not perfect from the minute you try to change something.
Right.
That you're this industrial manufacturing company that suddenly wants to become a digital platform, and you're finding it's not so easy to do that. Well, why? Well, it's because you've got these practices that are all designed to minimize risk, achieve certainty. As we say, it's very difficult to ship beta versions of refrigerators. You typically, as an industrial manufacturer, don't want to ship products with defects. And yet digital companies, software companies, technology companies, data companies provide services and products all day long with known bugs, known defects. The concept of risk and the concepts of certainty, the concepts of how to make sense of what it means to engage a customer are all fundamentally different in the digital world. Fundamentally different. And they're different because the practices that go into those businesses to sustain those businesses, to make those businesses evolutionarily adaptive, are fundamentally different. Right. That's cultures, right? So again, until you actually are willing to rethink how you build products, do you need to go through 30 stage gate reviews to before a product gets green lighted, and takes 2 years, and you have to establish the financial ROI of the project at every stage gate along the way? Or, can you adopt a much more agile kind of fail fast kind of product development mentality and throw out the processes that are designed to minimize risk and achieve certainty, and decide that you're going to accept failure as a fundamental part of your business? Until you enact a practice like that, and many dozens others like it, you're probably not going to change your culture.
Fascinating.
That's no mean feat. No.
Fascinating. A corporate culture is not something that's plucked off the shelf or passed down, as I was saying before, like tablets of stone. I believe it's the embodiment, the soul of a business. I trust my guest today, David G. White Jr., author of Disrupting Corporate Culture, has given you the inspiration to ensure your culture is fit for purpose. Thanks, David, for a great interview.
Thank you, Malcolm.